Hello everyone, Juxtaposition here. Today's video is going to be a continuation of what I'm calling the Hollywood Murder, Mayhem, and Mendacity series. I'm going to periodically do videos. If you have any suggestions or requests, please post them below. We're also going to provide you a link to Google YouTube, where I did a 50-minute opener for Hollywood Murder, Mayhem, and Mendacity, which I'm quite proud of. And BitChute will not download it. I've tried for 24 hours and they will not accept that particular content. So paradoxically, we have a situation where the CIA Google will allow my video, whereas the British intelligence BitChute will not. So I don't know who I offended over there at Prince Charles, King Charles, London, England, but I guess I offended somebody because they don't like my content. All right, so I'm going to focus on Ronald Reagan briefly, very briefly, and I'm going to connect Ronald Reagan up with Art Linkletter, not his real name. His real name is Arthur Gordon Kelly, and he's from Sasquatch, Canada. That's important. We have a lot of Canadians that infiltrate into CIA Hollywood, and Art Linkletter appears to be one of those. He was an adopted child up there in Canada. And other luminaries we're going to talk about is Stephanie Powers. Again, not a real name. She's a Polish Jewish girl who was born in Montreal, Canada. That's not too far from where William Shatner was born. He's another Jewish boy from Canada. That is where Yoko Ono from private banking Illuminati nobility status from Tokyo, Japan. That is where she hosted her honeymoon with of her third husband, John Lennon, in a Montreal hotel called the Queen Elizabeth, where they did their Bed-In for Peace, featuring Timothy Leary, who's a lifetime CIA and West Point Academy military graduate. I'm not sure he graduated, but he attended as a cadet with a supervisory role at West Point on the Hudson River. So we have Timothy Leary, we got Yoko Ono, both with the clandestine services, both in Montreal, Canada. We have Stephanie Powers, born in Montreal, Canada. She's connected and plugged into the clandestine services. That's not her real name. Stephanie Powers' real name, in case you're interested, it was Stefania Federkayowicz. Stefania Federkayowicz. To be precise, Stephanie Zafra Paul Federkayowicz. So naturally, at age 16, when she was a cheerleader at Hollywood High School where Vincent Bugliosi attended, Hollywood High School where Nancy Sinatra attended for a brief time. Nancy Sinatra, the daughter of Frank Sinatra. Naturally, Hollywood cannot have you be employed with a name like Stefania Federkayowicz, so they changed it to Stephanie Powers. It's more marketable, right? Sort of like David Jansen had his name changed from David Meyer to David Jansen, or like Mark Lane had his name Levin dropped and replaced by Lane, so it became Mark Lane. Like Oliver Stone, whose real name is Silverstein, dropped the Silverstein and used Stone. Oliver Stone, right? See, some people in the CIA use their real names, and some people have name changes. So, for example, Abigail Folger, her CI name for private banking in Hollywood and in Manhattan, New York, when she worked at the Gotham bookstore for Columbia University, Abigail Folger's CI name was Abigail Folger. Sharon Tate's CI name was Sharon Tate, even though her father was in Army intelligence, working at both Fort MacArthur and then in the Presidio, San Francisco, next to the Nancy and Paul Pelosi residence near Haight-Ashbury. And his name was long-haired Paul Tate. I'm sure he did have some code names, but I don't know what they were. He did not wear his Army uniform. He wore hippie clothes and long hair and sunglasses. So he was always in disguise, right? It's like an older hippie. For the those pesky anti-draft, anti-Vietnam resistance movements up there in the summer of love, 1967, in San Francisco. So Ronald Reagan's CIA name was Ronald Wilson Reagan. Art Linkletter's CIA name was Art Linkletter, but his real name was Arthur Gordon Kelly. William Holden, and I do encourage you to watch my William Holden video. I think I'm quite proud of that product as well. And also watch my William Shatner mysterious death of his third of 4 wives, Nerine Elizabeth Kidd Shatner, drowned in the bottom of the deep end of his swimming pool in Studio City, just below the Natalie Wood home at 7708 Woodrow Wilson Drive. That's right, I said Woodrow Wilson Drive. One World Order, Woodrow Wilson. Council of Foreign Relations, Woodrow Wilson Drive, atop Laurel Canyon, at the tippy top of the summit, and just below we have the William Shatner wife dying on the 30th year anniversary of Sharon Tate and Abigail Folger. They were murdered on August 9th, 1969, and William Shatner's third wife, 28 years his junior, was murdered 30 years later on August 9th, 1999. The only difference really being that Abigail Folger and Sharon Tate were murdered by military soldiers using this M7 bayonet, which would have been attached to the M16 rifle to give it that extra leverage and punch, so that would account for the 102 bayonet strikes for 4 people on the property. There was a 103rd strike against Stephen Parent, who was fleeing the property in his parents' automobile, but that was non-fatal to his wrist. It did take out his wristwatch and toss it into the rear passenger seat. So that's 103 bayonet strikes on 5 people, but primarily it's 102 bayonet strikes, 1.5 inches to 6 inches deep for 4 people. So it's pretty serious when you get to the business end of a double-edged carbon steel M7 bayonet. I mean, there's nothing funny about this. I'd have you interview all of the My Lai massacre survivors, but I don't know where to find them. I mean, I think there were some people that didn't get killed at My Lai. Very few. 504 did. All right, so William Holden's real name is William Franklin Beatty Jr., and he was living over there in Pasadena when he was picked up by a scout working out of the Pasadena Art Theater, Performing Arts Theater there on Colorado Boulevard, I believe. Anyway, so his name was changed to Holden. Now that's important because Bill Holden, or William Holden, he becomes best man for Ronald Reagan's second marriage to Nancy Davis, not her real name, right? Everybody knows that Nancy Davis is really Anne Frances Robbins, right? Anne Frances Robbins is Nancy Davis, eventually becomes Nancy Reagan, the wife of the President of the United States. Anne Frances Robbins. See, so Nancy Davis's CIA name was Nancy Davis, and then later Nancy Reagan. But her real name is Anne Frances Robbins. So that's another example of a person who changed their name. Ronald Reagan was always Ronald Reagan. Sharon Tate was always Sharon Tate. Abigail Folger was always Abigail Folger. Timothy Leary was always Timothy Leary. That's his CIA name and his real name. Eunice Mejia, Abigail Folger's mother, that was her CIA State Department name, and that was also her real name. Peter Folger, that was his CIA State Department name and his real name also. So there's a lot of hodgepodge of names in the Hollywood cult. Nancy Pelosi, that's her CIA name, but before that, her mafia name was D'Alessandro. That was the name of her father, who was a United States congressman before she was, and he was associated with organized crime out of Baltimore, Maryland. So her real name is D'Alessandro, but her CIA name is Pelosi. Paul Pelosi is his CIA name, and Paul Pelosi is his Jesuit Roman Catholic name when he inadvertently killed his older brother David near the Crystal Geysers Reservoir in close proximity to where we all know the head of FTX, right? The fake head, Sam Bankman-Fried, It's where he went to school. It's where Patricia Hearst went to school. That's where Charles Ng went to school at the Notre Dame Academy close by to the Crystal Springs Reservoir. That's where Paul Pelosi was involved with a manslaughter charge that didn't happen in 1956. Anyway, so getting back to Ronald Reagan is he was CIA all the way from OSS, recruited in World War II, and probably before that in 1937 once he started to do some films. But really his career blasted off literally in 1942 when he became volunteered for the Army Reserves and was sent to Fort Mason at age 31 in San Francisco. Good old CIA San Francisco, next to Crissy Fields and the Presidio Army Base. And there's Ronald Reagan as part of the Army Reserves and essentially attached to the Presidio and Crissy Fields, which is Airborne Army. And there he is, and he's right below where the Paul Pelosi fake hammer attack was, right above him at Pacific Heights, next to the Sacred Heart Convent School, located at 2222 Broadway, Pacific Heights, the infamous fake hammer attack that never happened. And we know it never happened because Paul Pelosi isn't dead or in a coma. If he was hit by a hammer at age 82, he'd be dead or in a coma. And he is neither dead nor in a coma. So therefore, it was all a big mendacity, right? When he crashed into Jesus Lopez back in May, I think May 28th, 2022, he nearly killed him and himself in his 911 Porsche Carrera, a car that can go 0 to 60 in 2.7 seconds and go over 200 miles per hour. And he's an 82-year-old man falling down drunk driving it. And he didn't die in that car wreck either. He totaled the car. And he totaled Jesus Lopez's Jeep, driving a Jeep. It was a high-speed crash. T-bone. Paul Pelosi's on borrowed time, right? Don't forget William Colby, CIA all the way. He was put away at age 76. And Paul Pelosi's looking forward to maybe turning 83 pretty soon. And he's already had 2 near-fatal incidents. One involving a turbo or a Carrera 911 and a styrofoam hammer at 2:30 in the morning. Anyway, this is where Ronald Reagan really was rolled into town to San Francisco, and he spent about a year there, which is where Sharon Tate's father spent multiple years there, is where Timothy Leary spent 4 to 5 years there. It's where Hunter S. Thompson spent a number of years there. This is where they all go. Ken Kesey, he spent a number of years in Haight-Ashbury, San Francisco, in close proximity to the St. Ignatius Parish and the University of San Francisco Jesuit University. So, of course, Ronald Reagan then volunteered for the AAF, which stands for Army Air Forces. Army Air Forces. So that meant Culver City propaganda films down in Los Angeles. Culver City, where Anne Heche fiery car crash never happened, where Dorothy Stratton was murdered in a ritual killing about a mile away from where Ronald Reagan worked in Culver City, where Bob Crane worked, where Sharon Tate signed a 7-year contract effectively with MGM and CBS, Columbia Pictures, and CBS Television. She signed the contract in the same building that Ronald Reagan would have worked out of in Culver City. And it's the same people who signed the Beatles to their contract. They signed a 5-year deal with EMI in London, England, and they were essentially managed by CBS and RCA Victor through EMI, which people think's running the show. No, they're not. They don't control the airwaves. CBS and NBC control the radio waves to play your music. And whose music is it? Is it really Paul McCartney's music, or is it John Lennon's music? No, it's the Tavistock Institute's music. It's whatever they want you to play. And you're a cover band. That's what the Beatles were. They were a cover band. They played music that was professionally written by probably people that were aged 35 to 60 years old, who could play the piano and play classical piano and were professional songwriters, right? That would explain the voluminous production of the Beatles. Not to mention, how do you get on the Ed Sullivan Show, which is a total CIA clandestine services approved platform to deliver social engineering content? Well, that would be the CIA. That's who controls Ed Sullivan. Ed Sullivan doesn't decide what acts go on his television show. It's not his show. It's owned by CBS. You think Howard Stern's decides his guests? Give me a break. It's a tool. Does Joe Rogan book his guests, or does some invisible hand do it? Yeah, some invisible hand is involved with what guests appear and how the editing works and what subjects will be talked about and to what extent. Everything pretty much on the Howard Stern show and the Joe Rogan show is very shallow, surface level. They never drill down into anything because that's not their purpose. Their purpose is to just waste your time, like baseball or steroid football, waste your time. It's called pacification and control. That is the true purpose of the Howard Stern show, is to waste your time. All right. Then we have the fact that Natalie Wood comes into the picture. Natalie Wood, whose real name is Natasha Zakharenko. She's a Russian immigrant, again, born in San Francisco in 1938, right before, The Wizard of Oz comes out, just before Charlie Chan at Treasure Island comes out in 1939. Charlie Chan at Treasure Island, he's trying to find the murderers of some homicides in San Francisco, which turns out later to be Dr. Zodiac, who's a psychic, which is code for psychologist, a psychic. But really, he's being impersonated by Cesar Romero's character, who's a magician, but who is really Dr. Zodiac, who's a psychic, who takes advantage of wealthy people by tarot card readings, etc., and then steals their money or involves in larceny, grand larceny type activities, swindling people, and then he murders people that are onto him through poison, through stabbing, like with a bayonet, and by pistol, aka gunshot. The Zodiac Killer of San Francisco. And that film was released in September, I believe September 8th, 1939, which is 30 years and 33 days before the final Zodiac killing in Nancy Pelosi's neighborhood, Paul Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi, in Presidio Heights, which is also Sharon Tate's father's neighborhood. And Paul Stein, age 29, a yellow cab taxi driver, is shot in the head with a 9mm pistol. And the killer calmly walks 2.5 blocks into the Army base Presidio, never to be seen or heard from again. The Zodiac. Now, there was a Zodiac that was heard from again. I just don't think it was the person who pulled the trigger that killed 29-year-old Paul Stein. And that's the same age that Paul Pelosi was, and that's the same age that Nancy Pelosi was at the time of that Zodiac killing on October 11th, 1969. Which is just 2 months after Sharon Tate and Abigail Folger were murdered, both of whom are connected up with Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco. In the case of Abigail, her mother lives again on Broadway, Pacific Heights, home of the infamous fake camera attack, where the Sacred Heart Convent is 2222 Broadway, Pacific Heights. That's where Abigail Folger's mother lived, a few blocks from there. And that's where Diane Feinstein, a Jewish girl whose name is Goldman, that's not her real name either. Anyway, so she's a little Jewish girl who goes to a strict Roman Catholic military academy called the Sacred Heart Order. So the whole thing is very, very disturbing, in my opinion. People don't use their real names. They're Jewish, but they're going to Catholic schools. You've got Catholics partnering with Jewish people that use different names. They drop the Meyer, they drop Levin, they drop Silverstein, and they call themselves names that you think they're more Anglo-Saxon, I guess. So Natalie Wood becomes a star after she appears with Orson Welles, whose name appears in this story, in 1946. That's Natalie Wood's first speaking role after they switched her name from Natasha Zakharenko to Natalie Wood. She appears with Orson Welles, and she is 8 years old, and Orson Welles is like 33, I think. And that's important because the last film that Sharon Tate appeared in before she was murdered was with Orson Welles in Rome, Italy, a film entitled 13 Chairs, or 12 plus 1 in French. Anyway, Natalie Wood is moved into 7708 Woodrow Wilson Drive, gated compound with a swimming pool where Natalie never learned to swim. And Robert Wagner moves in with her on her 18th birthday, and then they get married the next year when she's 19. But he's living with her when she's 18. They're on top Laurel Canyon at 7708 Woodrow Wilson Drive. You can try to Google it. It's really tricky to find it. I know exactly where it is, and I've been to the property. I've been to the gate. I haven't been on into the property. But there's surveillance cameras all over that little Woodrow Wilson Drive off Woodrow Wilson Drive. That's to fake you out, so you'll drive forever and never find it. It's real close to the proper. There's Woodrow Wilson proper, and then there's Woodrow Wilson improper, which is where 7708 was for Natalie Wood and Robert Wagner. And then later it was to Cass Elliot, and then later it was to Dan Aykroyd and Donna Dixon. Dan Aykroyd, another Canadian who appeared in Trading Places with Eddie Murphy, which told you how Wall Street sets the price, that Willie Valentine, Mr. Valentine, set the price of pork bellies. How can you set the price if it's a free market? Wouldn't it be more like Craigslist, where you just post, you throw out a number and then people make offers? Typically, they make offers lower than your offering price. Then you get bids that are usually lower. That's how it works in a free market. But if you're on Wall Street and you have hedge fund partners, fake investors, that's called chandelier bidding, where you can set a price and you can make the price go up or down based on the secret conspiracy plot that your hedge fund partner is to follow, else they'll lose their job. Remember, in our system of maritime law, we follow orders or people die, and that includes the managing directors of venture capital firms like Sequoia Capital or KKR or Blackstone or any one of the mutual fund companies that you think you know of, or any charitable foundation endowment that you think you believe in, or anything such as World Vision, or such a thing as the Peace Corps. For example, that Ronald Reagan was against the Peace Corps. Ronald Reagan was against socialized medicine, aka Medicare. He was opposed to Medicare. He was for the right to bear arms, a constitutionally guaranteed right to bear arms. Ronald Reagan was a lifetime member of the National Rifleman Association, the NRA, and I believe in that too. I believe you should have the right to bear arms. I think you should have the right for free assembly. I believe you should have the right for freedom of speech. I believe vehemently that Medicare is a perverted, obscene, disgrace, disaster of a program designed to bribe hospital administrators, medical doctors, and the nursing profession into conducting experiments on people of the United States unwittingly. And you're supposed to trust them, and they're getting paid to keep you sick and to not make you better, and to spurn all alternative treatments, most of which are highly effective compared to what their voodoo socialized reimbursement program will do. All right, so I wanted to tell you that there's another theme in here, is that everybody's got a control agent, every single person. And you should know that Abigail Folger was plugged in upon her graduation from Harvard University to work on the Robert Kennedy presidential campaign in Manhattan, New York. And so was Stephanie Powers. She was plugged into the Robert Kennedy presidential campaign. She was 25 years old. Abigail Folger was 24 years old. And Sharon Tate was 25 years old when she and her fake husband, not a real husband, appeared at John Frankenheimer's home at the Malibu Gated Colony for a campaign fundraising dinner, which is the Tom Hanks home. Tom Hanks that's gone missing for the last 2.5 years. We don't know where Tom Hanks is. Anyway, that home on the ocean there is where Robert Kennedy was staying with his wife Ethel, and they were staying with John Frankenheimer, another Jewish gentleman from back east, who's a big shot Hollywood director for The Manchurian Candidate, for example. And he is hosting Robert Kennedy at his home, and he's the one that drove Robert Kennedy 1 hour drive to the Wilshire Boulevard Ambassador Hotel in his Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud the Third. The Third. That's a procession of death, where Robert Kennedy was murdered by a Lockheed employee, Thane Eugene Caesar, not Sirhan Sirhan. He's a scapegoat. Anyway, there's Sharon Tate sitting there at dinner with Robert Kennedy, you know, the Last Supper of Robert Kennedy before he had his head blown off at the Ambassador Hotel. There's Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski, her fake husband. And, you know, they wouldn't be there unless it was work. I mean, that's an assignment that they're required to go to that. That's a cult ritual. That's a cult ritual dinner. When you have a Last Supper before you're murdered, I would call a Last Supper a cult ritual. Wouldn't you? So Stephanie Powers was integrated into that program along with Abigail Folger, who's a private banker. Stephanie Powers is going to be a movie star, television star, mostly television star. But she's a Polish-Jewish girl. And Roman Polanski is a Polish boy. And Wojtek Frykowski, who's the control agent for Abigail Folger, he's a Polish boy, twice divorced. And Jerzy Kaczynski, who's their partner in Manhattan at Columbia University, he's a Polish boy. So you have Jerzy Kaczynski, Polish Jew, Roman Polanski, Polish Jew, Wojtek Frykowski, Polish Jew, Stephanie Powers, Polish Jew, right? And they're infiltrated in the Robert Kennedy presidential campaign, and they're associated with Sharon Tate, who's associated with Thomas Coomer, who goes by his CIA name as Jay Sebring, and he's associated with Art Linkletter, and he works with Art Linkletter's son, Robert, in the Batman television series at CBS. Art Linkletter worked for CBS for 25 years. He's the single number one most important person at CBS television and radio, and CBS radio and television is Art Linkletter, not Ed Sullivan. Not Ed Sullivan. Art Linkletter, number one. Art Linkletter partners with Ronald Reagan to open Disneyland on July. I got it right here. July 1955. But I got the exact date. So let's look at the date. I got some news here for you regarding our Disneyland discussion. The grand opening of Disneyland, this is very important. This was done on July 17th, 1955 in Anaheim, which formerly was an orange grove. After years of planning, Walt Disney's very first theme park, Disneyland, opened its gates at 2:30 p.m. on Sunday, July 17th, 1955 in Anaheim, California. Television crews, Art Linkletter, Ronald Reagan, Bob Cummings, the Musketeers were all in attendance. Television crews, and don't forget the California fake governor, Goodwin J. Knight, was there, along with 28,000 invited guests. They witnessed the opening of Walt Disney's dream. It was broadcast on the Disney-owned ABC at 4:30 p.m., so we had a 2-hour delay. This is like a 2-hour grand opening party. It was the biggest live telecast at that time in history. Actor Ronald Reagan, who would later become the President of the United States. He was first the governor of California. He was also the president of the Screen Actors Guild for 6 terms, which is twice 2 different occasions, for a grand total of 6 years. And they introduced the 53-year-old Walt Disney. Remember, Ronald Reagan was 44 years old, and Art Linkletter's birthday was July 17th. So Art Linkletter had his 43rd birthday during the grand opening. So Art Linkletter worked on his birthday, July 17th, 1955. And there they were, quote unquote, "To all who come to this happy place, welcome. Disneyland is your land. Here age lives and fond memories of the past. Here youth may savor the challenge and promise of the future. Disneyland is dedicated to the ideals, the dreams, and the hard facts which have created America, with the hope that will be a source of joy and inspiration for all the world." Okay, let me paraphrase that. This is a place to restructure your brain, to capture your imagination, and to indoctrinate you into a Wizard of Oz authoritative maritime law system. That's the purpose of Disneyland, with all of its corporate exhibitors in the copycat format of the World Fair exhibition. That's Disneyland. You know there's a jail at Disneyland, right? Yeah, there's a jail at the north end of the property on Ball Road under the Dumbo exhibition. The Dumbo exhibition, there's a jail, Disneyland jail. My cousin was put into a holding cell at the Disneyland jail. It's designed as a military complex. There's two Disneylands. There's what you see on the surface, then there's an underground Disneyland with tunnel systems and a jail. And there's also a club where they serve alcohol, the Club 33, Masonic Club 33, which is part of the Pirates of the Caribbean. That's where they serve alcohol if you're a member of Club 33. At Disneyland, they have alcohol at Disneyland, but it's for members only. It's like the Magic Castle on Franklin Avenue. That's a members only club. You have to be a guest of a member, or you can do the public guided tours on selected days. But it's a private club where Hollywood showcases illusion and deception, right? Anyway, what I'm trying to tell you is that Fess Parker was also there, and it's not mentioned in this propaganda piece, but Art Linkletter and Ronald Reagan were the masters of ceremonies for Disneyland. And Ronald Reagan was a CIA operative at that time. He became a CIA operative in 1947 with his code name. Ronald Reagan was given a code name T10. And Art Linkletter did 25 years at CBS, Masonic Eye, and he did 19 years over at NBC, RCA Victor. And Art Linkletter was the creator and curator of House Party, 25 years at CBS, House Party, radio and television. And then he wrote a series of books, Kids Say the Darndest Things. William Holden went on to star in my favorite film, Love is a Many Splendored Thing. Love is a Many Splendored Thing. And he also was the best man for Ronald Reagan and Nancy Davis in 1952 at the Little Brown Church, which is down the hill from where Natalie Wood's parents were moved into at 7708 Woodrow Wilson Drive, around the time that Ronald Reagan was married to Nancy Davis. That is also down the hill from where William Shatner, the Canadian Jewish gentleman's third wife, was murdered at the bottom of his swimming pool. Very close proximity, like under 3 miles away from the Little Brown Church, which is in Studio City, which is, by the way, a few blocks away from where the fake Charles Manson family, the girls were kept on 13158 Chandler Boulevard in 5 houses with 3 swimming pools. That's where the casting was for teenage girls to be later rolled out as part of the Manson family psych ops, because there was no Manson family in real life. There was on television, newspapers, magazines, and fake books, but not in real life. And Stephanie Powers goes on, she's 25 years younger than William Holden, the best man for Ronald Reagan, and she becomes his girlfriend for 9 years, much in the same way that William Colby had a girlfriend 25 years younger than him that he married, Shelley Shelton, before he was murdered and done away with. And William Holden was murdered and done away with on or about between November 12th and 16th, we don't know, because his body was left for many days before it was found. I believe it was found on Monday, November 16th. Stephanie Powers is working closely with Robert Wagner in their television show Heart to Heart, which was a five-year run, and they were in the middle of their 5 years. And young Stephanie Powers, the Polish Jewish girl, is working with Robert Wagner, who's on the boat the Splendor, named after William Holden's best film, Love is a Many Splendored Thing. Natalie Wood is murdered at Santa Catalina Island in the harbor there on November 29th, which is 13 days after Bill Holden's body is discovered in Santa Monica. And he's allegedly dating this Stephanie Powers, who says she calls him every day. But that's a lie, because if she called him every day, he didn't answer the phone for 4 days. So What's up with that? You call him every day, but he doesn't pick up because he's dead. Because he's dead. And she's working closely with Robert Wagner, who's with Christopher Walken, when Natalie Wood gets thrown into the water, 55-degree water, like a sack of potatoes. So I'm telling you that Abigail Folger worked for the CIA, and Stephanie Powers works for the CIA. And Natalie Wood was doing a CIA film called Brainstorm with Christopher Walken when she was murdered. And Christopher Walken is on that boat, the Splendor, along with Robert Wagner, who lived at 7708 Woodrow Wilson Drive. So we have cult rituals every direction you go. We've got Abigail Folger doing work with Robert Kennedy. We've got Stephanie Powers doing work with Robert Kennedy. We've got Sharon Tate doing work with Robert Kennedy. Sharon Tate, Abigail Folger, Stephanie Powers, Ronald Reagan. He knows William Holden. Ronald Reagan is recovering from his fake assassination Plachette dart bullet into his dart that hit his rib cage. And he no sooner recovers from his assassination attempt when his best man from his wedding to Nancy Davis gets whacked on the head and dies in a pool of blood, bottomless, in his pristine apartment, decorated like the set of Love is a Many Splendored Thing. This is Hollywood laughing at you. Then William Shatner's third wife, 28 years younger than him, is murdered at the bottom of a swimming pool on the 30th year anniversary of Sharon Tate's murder. And Art Linkletter's daughter, Diane, she's murdered 2 months from Sharon Tate's murder by being thrown out of her 6th floor apartment onto North Horn Avenue. And then 4 days later, her next door neighbor across the street is murdered by acute barbiturate poisoning. In the same way that Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, Judy Garland was, in the same way that Marilyn Monroe was, in the same way that Inger Stevens was. That's 3. Probably in the same way that Jean Harlow was. Probably in the same way that Lindsay Pearlman was in West Hollywood in Runyon Park. All right, so I want you to know that these people all know each other and that Ronald Reagan was a CIA informant from World War II forward and was close friends with Art Linkletter, who had 3 of his children murdered. He had his son-in-law, John Zwyer, shot in the back of the head the month before Sharon Tate was killed. Then he had his daughter, Diane Linkletter, thrown out of her apartment at age 20 while she's baking cookies on a Saturday morning at 9 o'clock. That's a murder. Okay? And then he has his son, Robert, killed in a mysterious car crash on Santa Monica Boulevard by a head-on collision where the woman is not charged with vehicular manslaughter in much of the way that Paul Pelosi was not charged in the death of his brother David. Okay? And then you have to know that Art Linkletter knew Sharon Tate and he knew Tom Coomer also. So that's 5 people, young people that Art Linkletter knew that were whacked. Look at all the people that Frank Sinatra and Ronald Reagan knew who were murdered. I mean, Ronald Reagan knew all these people. He knew Art Linkletter. He knew William Holden, right? He knew Art Linkletter's children. He probably knew Sharon Tate, and he probably knew Tom Coomer. He definitely knew Steve McQueen, and he knew all those stars that you see in Hollywood because he was the president of the Screen Actors Guild for 6 years, which is a cult. And he's a paid informant. He's paid to know these people. When he was working for General Electric, who hired him in 1954, just before he opened Disneyland, where General Electric is a major exhibitor, they paid him $125,000 a year in 1954. And he was required to, give talks, pep talks, motivational speaking to the 200,000 employees of GE. $125,000 a year in 1954. That's like $2 million a year today. Plus, he was getting paid as the president of the Screen Actors Guild. So he's double dipping all over. He's paid by the FBI to be a paid informant. The FBI basically works for the CIA. It's run by a transsexual cross-dresser, J. Edgar Hoover, who has his homosexual lover on the payroll, Clyde Tolston. Like, they're running the FBI? No way. CIA is running the FBI, which means the CIA is running Ronald Reagan. So he's getting paid from CIA. He's getting paid from Screen Actors Guild, which is a subcontractor of CIA. He's getting paid from General Electric, which is a CIA contractor. That's 3 different paychecks that Ronald Reagan is getting from the CIA. Look, I like Ronald Reagan, okay, but he's completely owned by the CIA. And they're whacking his friends with great regularity. You know he knew Natasha Zakharenka, a.k.a. Natalie Wood. And you know he's met William Shatner. And you know he knows Robert Vaughn and Steve McQueen from Man from U.N.C.L.E. So that's what I have to say today. I just wanted to connect some dots for you that Ronald Reagan was completely and utterly owned. And he took over the Screen Actors Guild gig from the Wizard of Oz's brother. Because as you remember, Judy Garland starred in The Wizard of Oz, and the Mighty Wizard was played by Frank Morgan. And his brother, Ralph, was the very first Screen Actors Guild president and served 3 terms, 1933, 1938, 1939. But that's 3 years that Ralph Morgan, the brother of the Wizard of Oz. But Ronald Reagan served 6 terms, okay, which is twice as many as the Wizard of Oz's brother. So when you serve more terms as president of the Screen Actors Guild, more than the Wizard of Oz's brother, then you are completely punked by the CIA. All right, thanks for listening. Have a great day. We'll talk soon.